Thank you so much for having me. And, you know, I've already fulfilled part of my promise, which was to be old and balding, so we're really close on this one. Thank you. And that's not my slide, so I hope something happens, and I'm not sure at a point. But, you know, I am a curator, and when I started thinking about this, I really wanted to do a whole thing about waste and why we shouldn't waste anything. And then I started thinking about that, and I thought, who am I to preach? And then I started thinking I'm an old balding guy, so that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to preach, talk about life a little bit, but I'm going to try to do the 10, I don't even know what they're called, the TED commandments. So let's talk about what I do. I'm a curator, and curators deal with stuff. That's all we do. We deal with tons and tons of stuff. And as I deal with stuff, I tend to think about some of the really strange things that happen in people's lives. And I really started thinking about what a person's life is. We have over 80,000 things at the State Museum just filling the hallways and filling the storage spaces. And they're really interesting things and some kind of lame and boring things. And what they really do is tell me about who people are and what people do, who people want to know, and how people want to impress each other by collecting things. And it made me really think about when it's all said and done, all this stuff is going to be out here and doesn't really matter. So that's what it makes me think about. With 80,000 objects, you can imagine we don't get to show a lot of that. So curators get to be very selective and decide what it is you get to see from the State Museum collection. So while we're being selective, we're deciding what it is that really speaks to people and what it is that's so important to you and me that we need to show it. So this is pottery storage, and we love to take people behind the museum scenes and show them what we have. They look at all the objects, and it always surprises me what it is that people are most fascinated with. And you can imagine that there are some obvious things, some things that are really precious, things that are really expensive. And I have a curator friend, an art curator friend. We talk about things like the Roadshow, the Antiques Roadshow. And he says to me, you know, I hate that show, Tom. I hate that show. It's just disgusting. It's like so much stuff. I'm so tired of looking at stuff. And I thought, you know, he's kind of right. Every time you turn around, someone else has something else that they want to impress somebody with, or impress themselves with and get excited about. So, you know, it is really exciting to have some wonderful things like these. What does it all mean? So, I do have some phrases up here. You know, I hate to read, and I'm not going to, but it's amazing as you go through life that things just filter in, and things just kind of, you keep hearing the same phrases over and over again. And this is one I'm not sure I ever live by, but I think it's a good one to think about. But part of my job is to really deal with beautiful things. And when you deal with great numbers of beautiful things on a day in, day out basis, you can get a little immune to the beauty of it all. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's good to be able to work with a beautiful collection of antique instruments like this telescope, and to really have a respect for it, but to also kind of understand its place in history, but not take it too seriously, and understand that this is the kind of thing that someone would really want to look at. We have this beautiful collection of telescopes, and people want to see it. People want to see them all. But I look at it, and I collected all these instruments from a garage and from an attic, not too far from here, about a half a mile up the street. And this is one of the best collections in the world. And as I was digging through it, I thought, who in the world has time to collect all this stuff? Well, fortunately, there's somebody who really loves this material. He loves to look through it. He loves to understand what it was like to go way back in time and to peer into the night sky and to understand how beautiful it was for these people to do really elemental science and some advanced science with some really neat instruments. So he really did stop, and he looked at these and he played with them. And when I went to dig them around, you know, some collectors have everything in nice little cubby holes and everything's neatly arranged. This stuff was scattered. It was a total mess, and I couldn't find any of it. And I'm still, every single day, going through all of it, trying to understand it. So what is it that people like to go and find when they come to the State Museum and go behind the scenes? And it's not too hard to imagine that people like the pretty stuff, but it's really the weird stuff that connects you and me, that connects all of us. And we have some really crazy things. We have, obviously, a casket for a child. And if you can imagine what that's like. I had a friend one time who worked for a casket company, made caskets for children. And he got so depressed that he had to quit his job. I mean, he was like, I cannot do this job anymore. So, you know, people really identify that. I mean, we understand that going through that process and dealing with someone, a loved one who might die young, is really awful. We have a whole section with hearses, and people love that area. We have other things in the collection like an iron lung. And if you can imagine somebody who had polio who is lying in an iron lung, and this machine is breathing for him or her day in and day out. Some people wear it for brief periods, and some people have actually spent nearly their entire lives in iron lungs. Something we don't deal with much anymore, though we still have some folks on those. So some of these objects that people just have to understand because it's part of our humanity, it's part of who we are and what we do. I really love this one. This is a machine, and whenever I do behind the scenes, and I think I might influence what people tell me is their favorite because I take them to my favorites. And this machine was really great. It came from a place, a hospital, and it's a machine that generates static electricity, and they used this before current was really readily available. And so there's a hand crank, and you take this hand crank and you spin it and you generate huge amounts of electricity, and they would drive x-ray machines, early x-ray machines, and some of the other material, the equipment they needed in a hospital. But the use that they love to talk about when I take them behind the scenes is that they would generate enough electricity to shock someone on the forehead and change the way they think. So this is a static electricity machine that would actually induce electroshock therapy. So, people putting themselves in this situation, I mean, to turn that crank and to get it going and get these wheels spinning and all these parts going and get this lightning thing, and just imagining what that's like. This is really what makes collecting and things so interesting. So when I think about things, I think about what it is that we all are trying to collect as we move ahead in our lives, and I think they really do define us. My wife loves the TV show Columbo, and I know there's so few old people here. But Columbo was a show back in the 1970s, and it was Peter Falvey, he was a detective. And there was a guy who played Artemis Gordon back in the Wild Wild West, which was another really cool show from long ago. And he was an art critic, and he said that we are defined by our objects, by what we own. And I think most people take that to mean we are defined by the good stuff we own. And if we own junky stuff, that you don't want that definition. And of course, he was trying to steal someone's collection, and he killed somebody, and Peter Falk got him. So after I was asking a lot of questions, but these are the objects that are truly interesting and truly important, and it's not the big money objects. When someone calls a curator and says, "I have something beautiful and amazing, and you have to see it," a curator has to take that with a grain of salt, because it could be beautiful, it could be amazing, but it could be totally irrelevant to what's going on in South Carolina, who we are as South Carolinians, and what that means as far as our culture and material culture. So we love beautiful things, don't get us wrong, but it's always the story that matters. And it's our stories that we generate as we collect our things. You won't believe this, but this is what I coveted when I was in high school. And I think it's a 1968, and I'm not that old, but I am that balding. It's a 1968 Camaro. And I would drive by Mr. Barrett's house, and Mr. Barrett lived on the top of the hill in the most beautiful house overlooking the Mount Holyoke Range in Massachusetts. I'd ride my bike by every single day, and I'd see this car, and I thought, that would make me happy. That would make me so happy to own and drive around in, and the wind would flow through my hair that I had, and it would be so beautiful to own this car. And I mean, it went all the way into college. I would ride by Mr. Barrett's house and think, oh, it's still there, I have a chance. I never had a chance at the car, fortunately. I never owned a car like that, and I feel better for myself for it. But this is the kind of thing sometimes we covet. We really want something, and is this the thing that's going to make our lives better? So I like to talk about the things that have made my life better, and then I'm going to talk about things that I hope will make your lives better. And one is my bicycle. This is my second favorite gift I ever got. It wasn't my birthday, it was in the middle of July. My birthday's in November for anyone who's the 6th. And this is not the bicycle, but my dad showed up. I was working for them, and they were dirt poor, and they were running a brand new restaurant, and I was working for them day in and day out. And my dad came home, and he had this awful Ford pickup truck, the little one. It had a red top and yellow sides. And in the back, he had a brand new racing bicycle, and I had just started racing bicycles. And he brought this home to me, and I had no idea it was coming. It was a total shock. And I spent the entire summer riding that bike every mile I could, every single time I could get out and ride. Since then, I have just become a guy who just can't get enough of riding bicycles. And the reason it has value to me has nothing to do with how much it might have cost, although I pumped a lot of gas and fixed a lot of flats to make that happen for myself. But what really mattered to me was that I put a ton of energy into it. And this is what makes our life interesting and important, is that we put energy into things. It doesn't matter if we put money into things, you know, and it doesn't matter if we put anything else, but if we put a commitment and ourselves into something, then it really matters. And if it has meaning, ultimately, then it has meaning because we've done something to make it have meaning. It's my second favorite. And I'll read this because I love this. Ed Nowak was my trumpet teacher when I was in high school. When you practice, you should be better when you finish than when you started. Right? You know, and this is just so incredibly obvious, I think. And I know some of you are musicians or maybe you're athletes, and you really need to think about that when you start something. And every time I picked up that trumpet, I had this feeling like I am going to be better when I finish than when I started. And just thinking about that every single day, you need to focus on that. He also said, and I love this one, and every musician knows it, if you're going to make a mistake, and I say if, it's when, you're going to make, when you make a mistake, make a really loud mistake and make sure that everybody hears it. You know what, they know you're trying. This horn, despite the fact that I haven't played it in a year, sits on my living room floor, and it sits there because it's a constant reminder of what it is to struggle, what it is to constantly have something that's going to whip your rear end day in and day out because you're never going to master it. You will never be the master of an instrument because, or any other thing, because there's always something you can learn. So I covet these two things. These are the only two gifts. This ended up under the Christmas tree one year. I had to pay half of it. It was $378. I had to pay half of, and it ended up under the Christmas tree, and one of my favorite moments in my life. So what it is, what's it going to be for you to get your stuff in the museum? What is the coveted, the beautiful, the thing that ends up in the museum because of something that you've done, the energy you put into? And these are some nice folks who are curators, and they want to know what it is that you are going to do in your lives to get into a museum. And I think it's a lot easier than you think if you want to just buy a really expensive collection and donate it. But there are some other ways to get into museums, and I think that's something we should think about. I love this picture because this is an electrode camera tube from WIS TV, and it was a guy named Dave Rogers who was at WIS. I never met Dave, I'm not from here. But Dave died a couple of years ago, and his wife called me one day, and she was in the lobby, and she says, I have something I want you to look at, and would you mind just taking a look at this TV tube, she called it. And I went down, and I sat, and I learned all about a man named Dave Rogers, totally clueless. This is a guy who used to sit in Joe Pinner's big seat when Joe Pinner couldn't make the gig, and Joe, he would do the weather and the sports. I mean, that's a versatile man. But he was truly loved by all the people he worked with, and his wife had just an amazing compassion and love for who he was and what he did in his life. And she hands me this very simple object and said, this is what he saved from his career, and I really want you to have it. And so it's one of those things, like, do you collect something like that? Does this have a lot of meaning? And it truly does. It means something to anyone who knew Dave Rogers. And this is our next phase. The research piece for us is to go out, find more about Dave Rogers, and to see if we can fill in pieces of the South Carolina story. And what's so wonderful is I got to meet his widow, who is a wonderful woman, and get to know more about who South Carolina is, what South Carolina is, by learning more about the people who live here. So that's part of the job that we have, which has a lot more to do with people than it does objects. You know, we get really interesting calls. This is another one, and I'm sorry to be so depressing, but Leonard Cave was killed by a drunk driver about a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, from Orangeburg County. And Leonard Cave had another tragedy in his life when he was in college. I think he was at Winthrop, and he was a pole vaulter. Had a horrible, life-changing back injury, and was not able to do the things that he had hoped to do in his life. Threw himself into art, ended up being an amazing artist. Went to the University of Maryland, where he taught 5 classes a day, and then went on to work in his studio until all hours of the night, producing amazing works of art. Now, you can look at the sizes here. This is not a small piece of art. This is an enormous piece of art. And you think, you know, if I had a back injury, I think I'd like to start carving rice, you know, because it wouldn't hurt so much to lift when I finish the art. This thing is like this big and this wide and that thick. And you know, this was what Leonard Cave dedicated himself to teaching others and to working on his own craft. So when we had a chance, when Leonard Cave's teacher called us, he said, there are some pieces that we would like you to have. And they spread those throughout the state. So now Leonard Cave will be remembered for the amazing work that he's done. And that's the kind of thing the museum collects. I'm not sure what that is, but you know, it's a piece of Leonard Cave art. So. Some of the famous people who we see in museums are people like Charles Towns, and if you're into physics, you know that he got the Nobel Prize in physics for inventing the maser. He co-invented the maser, and the maser was the precursor to the laser. You know, pleasure is passive and happiness is active. If someone can tell me who wrote that, I don't know, but pleasure truly is passive, and to work is really what gives you happiness. And this is the work of Charles Towns. And when you hold a piece of paper that he scribbled on and he worked so hard on, and this is true for any of the folks who are in the museum who've worked so hard in their lives to achieve something, when you hold something like that, you just have a real appreciation for what it takes to become a better person and to change the way people work in the world, change machines in the world, and make major changes throughout. And this is some of his early work that we have at the State Museum. So this is the kind of stuff that really gets me excited because I get to hold this stuff and I get to get a chance to look at it and read it. Charles Towns, of course, did go on to accept the Nobel Prize in 1964, and this is the other thing. You know, it's great to have awards, but if you don't have the awards without the piece of paper, it's not nearly so interesting. I don't have much else to say except I want to talk about a guy you don't know, I'm sure, but maybe you do. Bland Quantz lived in, actually he lived right around the street from here. Just another guy right around the street. He invented a nutcracker, the Quantz rotary cracker. Do you know him? I see people get excited. No. So the Quantz rotary cracker is now the world standard nutcracker. This is the nutcracker that they use in every country in the United States. And it was made in a Forest Acres, right on the line of Columbia Forest Acres garage. And when Mr. Quantz, who was on our board, died, we got a call from his son and said, would you like to look at his first two prototypes? So we went over and we took a look at those prototypes. And sure enough, they were the kinds of things that just show the amount of work a person puts into something and the dedication someone has. And he was so committed to doing this one thing in his life. And he had this idea that if I could just achieve this one thing. He went on, of course, to make tons and tons of money. And after he died, the family sold the business to the only competitor. And, you know, they made some money too. But that wasn't what it was about. It was about this one thing and this one passion. That whole idea came about because he used to watch his mother now near Orangeburg, crack pecans in her hand, and of course her fingers were bloody by the end of the day. They had pecan orchards. So Bland Quantz did all of this by himself. Just one thing about this, I had a chance to speak to his family and friends, and they came to the museum to honor him, to honor his work when we opened a little exhibit about him. And I spoke about this, and I said, you know, I have two stacks in my office. I have a stack of drawings, and every drawing he ever made, every idea he ever had to get the 17 patents that he finally got for his work. And then I have 17 patents sitting on my desk here. And we're almost done, great. So the 17 patents, you know, this is the work. And I said, here's what I missed. I said, this is the work of a life. And I said, no, this is the work. And then, if I can remember to say it, the rest of you are the work. You're the people who sacrificed him. You're for him. You're the people who did all the other hard work to make sure that he achieved his dream. And that's the thing. We need to give. We need to give to others to help them achieve their dreams. I love this, and you know, like I said, these things filter through your lives, and as you go along, some of these phrases are totally meaningless to you, and it really takes some time to become bald and old to really understand that there's just this amazing process you go through in life that helps you learn to truly appreciate what's out there. And I truly believe that there are very few people who are awake in life. I think a lot of people walk around with their heads down, and I encourage you to just dive in and keep on striving to be the very best you can be, and to make every object you own and everything that you bring into your life something that you put work into, put value into, because that truly is the measure of a person and the measure of the kinds of things that make who you are. Thank you so much, and I hope I achieved my goal today.